Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 9th March 2021. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this article on page number 6 is related to the Afghan war and the Afghan peace process. Now, this has come into news in the context of the new president that has been elected in the United States of America. So, the new administration in the USA under the new president Joe Biden is presently reviewing the United States of America's foreign policy towards Afghanistan. Now, under Donald Trump administration, a peace deal was finalized in February 2020, and that was known as the Taliban peace deal and also is known as the Doha Agreement. However, the peace talks got stalled and there was a stalemate. In this background, in order to kickstart the Afghan peace process again, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of the State of the United States of America, has proposed a series of steps. Now, the details of these steps that have been proposed by Antony Blinken are yet to be released publicly. However, they have been highlighted based on the document that has been accessed by various news media. So, in this background, let us understand the Doha Agreement that was signed under the Trump administration and the latest US approach and India's concerns and stand on the Afghan peace process. So first we will look at the steps that have been proposed by the new administration under Joe Biden. Secondly, we will look briefly about what this Afghan war is all about. Further, we'll look into the question as to why the war is still going on and why has Taliban remained a strong force in Afghanistan. And after that, we'll look at the key details of the US Taliban deal that was signed back in February 2020 under the Donald Trump administration. What were the issues with the deal and what are concerns and stand of India as far as the Afghan peace process is concerned. And at the end, we'll look at the importance of Afghanistan for India for its regional aspirations. So first, let us start with the steps that have been proposed by the new administration of United States of America. And the points that we discuss here can be important for us from General Studies Paper 2 point of view in the topic International Relations. So the new administration under Joe Biden has called for a 90-day reduction in violence and a transitional government formed from both the sides. Now at this point it needs to be understood that there are two contesting agencies in the Afghanistan which want to establish their dominance and govern Afghanistan. First one is of course the Taliban, which controls majority of the areas in Afghanistan, and the second one is the present Afghanistan government. So the US administration has said that if there is a 90-day reduction in the violence by Taliban and the extremist forces, a new transitional government will be formed which will include both the sides, that is the Taliban and the present Afghanistan government. So this simply implies that there will be an immediate 50% share of Taliban in an interim government as a quid pro quo for a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. The second issue that Afghanistan faces is the elections. So the US has clearly said that the elections will be held only in future after the principles guiding the Afghanistan's future constitutional and governing arrangements are worked out. Further, on contentious issue of withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan, the US is considering full withdrawal of the US forces by May 1, 2021. And this was also the deadline that was set up under the Trump administration under the US Taliban peace deal that was finalized back in February 2020. Also, the new administration has proposed a United Nations facilitated conference with foreign ministers and envoys from Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, India, and the US. And this UN-led conference will be called in order to discuss a unified approach to supporting peace in Afghanistan. Now, why is America keen on calling all these important players as far as the peace process of Afghanistan is concerned? This is mainly because these are the countries which have stake in Afghanistan. Now, here we already note that United States of America is waging a full-blown war for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, and that is why it has its own interest. Further, Afghanistan is very important for India's regional security, and that is why India also becomes an important player. And India has been keenly taking interest in the developments that are taking place in Afghanistan for its own security and regional aspirations. Then Iran and Pakistan share their border with Afghanistan and both these countries have been alleged to be supporting Taliban in the Afghanistan. And then there are countries like Russia and China which are trying to increase their influence and countering the influence of United States of America in this region. And that is why the US has called for a UN facilitated conference which will include foreign ministers and envoys from all these countries which have interest in the peace process in Afghanistan. Now this brings us to the next question as to what is this Afghanistan war and when did it start and why did it start in the first place? So you might all be aware about the 9/11 attack that happened in United States of America, and it killed nearly 3,000 people, in which the World Trade Center was brought down. Now in this background, Osama bin Laden, who is the head of the Islamist terror group Al-Qaeda, was identified as being responsible for the 9/11 attacks in the United States of America on the World Trade Center towers. Now, at that time, Taliban was governing Afghanistan and it had its government established in the Afghanistan. And the Taliban regime in Afghanistan was known to be protecting bin Laden and it refused to hand bin Laden to the US administration. So, nearly a month after the 9/11 attacks, the United States of America launched airstrikes against Afghanistan. Now, besides US, other NATO countries also joined the war and Taliban was quickly removed from the power. However, Taliban was not completely eliminated from Afghanistan. And as such, in the next 20 years, it has tried to consolidate its power and influence in the Afghanistan. And that is one of the biggest cause of concern as far as the Afghanistan war is concerned. So why is the war still going on? First is of course related to the lack of clarity about the strategy of United States of America. And it has still not clearly outlined what it seeks or what is its final concern as far as the Afghanistan war is concerned. And it has not clearly outlined its strategy. Further, the Taliban has been trying to maximize its leverage during the peace negotiations. And this has mainly been because of the failure of the United States of America to completely eliminate Taliban from the Afghanistan. And at the same time, Taliban has been trying to increase its influence by the use of drug money and support from neighboring countries like Pakistan and Iran. And as a result of the increasing influence of Taliban in the Afghanistan, there has been an increase in the violence by Islamic State militants as well. And last but not the least, Taliban has had connections with Pakistan. So when the Afghanistan war started, Taliban disintegrated itself and found a refuge in the bordering areas with Pakistan. And it is at this place that these militants from Taliban have been getting military and moral support from the Pakistan state and the ISI. Although Pakistan has not clearly recognized or admitted that it is supporting the Taliban related terrorists, however, it is understood commonly that Pakistan has been supporting the intentions of Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, why has Taliban remained a strong force in Afghanistan? This is mainly because Taliban is making money to the tunes of about $1.5 billion through the drug trade. And you might be knowing that Afghanistan is the world's largest opium producer, and most of the opium poppies used for heroin are grown in the Taliban held areas. So there are regions which are under the control of Taliban, and there are other regions which are under the control of the present Afghanistan government. And Taliban has the advantage of being in hold of those areas which are the opium growing areas. And it is exploiting the opium farming in these areas for drug trade and is making money. And that is what has sustained the Taliban for such a long period of time. Now, besides drug money, Taliban is also receiving monetary support from Pakistan as well as Iran. And you can see in this infographic that was released by the BBC that there are areas that are under the control of Taliban, and these are the opium growing areas. And it is based on these opium growing areas that Taliban has been making good money. And that is why it has been able to sustain itself for this long 20-year war. And not just sustain itself, it has been increasing its influence lately. And that has been one of the biggest cause of concern for the United States of America. So in the context of the inconclusive war that is being fought in Afghanistan, the United States of America under Donald Trump got into a deal that is known as the US-Taliban deal. And as such, under this deal, the Trump administration made withdrawing of troops from Afghanistan a priority. And this was mainly based on the local US political considerations that the United States of America wants to withdraw itself from the Afghanistan war. And that is why it is indulging itself into a deal with the Taliban itself, which initially it replaced after the Afghan war started. Now, what are the key features of this deal? So, this deal was signed in February 2020, and it said that the United States and its NATO allies would withdraw all the troops in 14 months. And the deadline that was set up was 1st May 2021. However, the clause here was that Taliban has to uphold its promises, which will include not allowing Al Qaeda and other militants to operate in the areas that it controls in Afghanistan. So, after the US Taliban deal was finalized, Taliban stopped attacks on the international forces as a part of this agreement. However, it has continued to fight the Afghan government till date. Now, although the US Taliban peace deal was finalized, Taliban had put a condition to further proceed with the deal. And this condition was that it demanded that thousands of their men should be released in a prisoner swap agreement. And based on this, direct talks started in Doha in September 2020. However, a breakthrough has still not been reached, and that has been one of the biggest cause of concern. Now, at this point, Russia advocated that it will provide Moscow as a venue for the further proceedings of the peace deal in Afghanistan. And that is one of the biggest concerns for the United States of America because it considers Russia as one of its biggest adversaries in the region. So it is in this background that the new administration under Joe Biden has provided or talked about certain steps that need to be followed in order to finalize the key details of the Afghan peace process. Now, in a previous DNS video, we have already discussed what were the issues with this US Taliban peace deal, what were the concerns of India regarding the peace deal, and what is the stand of India on the Afghanistan peace process. Now, besides this, there was another initiative that was known as UN Secretariat 6+2+1 meeting that was held related to the Afghan peace deal. And in that particular agreement or conference that took place, India was not invited. So let us revise from that DNS video the issues with the US Taliban peace deal. Why was India not invited to the UN 6+2+1 dialogue? And also, what are India's concerns and what is India's stand on the Afghan peace process? And finally, what is the importance of Afghanistan for India? Now, what are the issues that are being witnessed in the functioning of the US Taliban peace deal? So, various commentators have said that the Taliban is now having an upper hand in the situation that is prevailing in Afghanistan. And that is mainly because there were loopholes in the US Taliban peace deal that was announced recently. Now, the first loophole in the functioning of the peace deal was that the United States of America did not insist on a ceasefire between Taliban and the Afghan government. And accordingly, Afghanistan has been witnessing episodes of violence which has been perpetrated by Taliban. Further, the United States of America kept the Afghanistan government out of the peace process. And due to this, Afghanistan has again continuously witnessed violence which is led by the Taliban. Now, recently, presidential elections were held in Afghanistan. And this presidential election witnessed a very low voter turnout, due to which the main opposition candidate, Abdullah Abdullah, did not recognize the elected government for a considerable period of time. However, he backed off only after being appointed the head of High Council for National Reconciliation that leads talks with the Taliban. And due to all these issues, the Taliban is presently having an upper hand in the situation that is prevailing in Afghanistan. And accordingly, this announcement of ceasefire by Taliban becomes important because it is likely to kickstart the intra-Afghanistan talks, that is, the talks between Taliban and the Afghanistan government, which were first announced in the US Taliban peace deal. Now, further, as we note that in the US Taliban peace deal, US was to lift sanctions against the Taliban and was also to work with the United Nations to lift the separate sanctions on the Taliban. And accordingly, the UN Secretariat had recently held a 6+2+1 meeting on regional efforts to support the peace in Afghanistan. Now, in this meeting, six neighbors of Afghanistan, namely China, Iran, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, plus two global players, that is the USA and Russia, and Afghanistan, attended the meeting. However, India was not invited to this meeting. So, now why India was not invited in this meeting? So, according to the UN Secretariat, India does not share any physical boundary with Afghanistan. Further, India did not support the US Taliban peace process. Further, India has been reluctant to talking to Taliban publicly, and this has contributed to the absence of invitation to India in this UN Secretariat 6 plus 2 plus 1 meeting. So now in this context, let us look at what are India's concerns about the US Taliban peace deal. So we note that India has not recognized the Taliban, and this has mainly been because Taliban has had links with various terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, who have targeted various Indians in Afghanistan. Further, India supports the democratically elected government of Afghanistan because it is being seen as friendly towards India. Further, Taliban as an organization gets a lot of support from Pakistan and the ISI, and hence the Taliban's victory in the peace deal would be a blow to India's effort to reach the Central Asia and to positively engage with the Afghanistan government. Further, we note that if Taliban comes to power, then there are high chances that China will get a free access to Afghanistan, and this will be an important blow to India's strategic interests in the Afghanistan and the Central Asia. Further, as we note that the Taliban has had links with various terrorist organizations which have targeted Indians, and if Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan, then India's efforts to fight terrorism in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir might also suffer a blow. So these are the concerns that have been raised by India regarding the peace deal, and accordingly India has not yet recognized Taliban. So then what is India's stand on the Afghanistan peace process? So according to India, the peace process in Afghanistan has to be Afghanistan led, Afghanistan owned and Afghanistan controlled. That is, there should be minimal interference of the other countries in the peace process of Afghanistan. Further, Afghanistan should build a national consensus for talks with Taliban. That is, it should include all the stakeholders in Afghanistan. Further, India was amongst the countries that had refused to recognize the Taliban regime in Afghanistan during the period of 1996 to 2001. And this was mainly because the Taliban's growth in Afghanistan was being driven by the deep state in Pakistan, that is the Pakistani army and the ISI. So accordingly, India's stand is that the peace process has to be Afghan led, Afghan controlled and Afghan owned. And all the initiatives and processes must include all the sections of Afghanistan's society, which should also include the legitimately elected government. Further, any process should respect the constitutional legacy and the political mandate in Afghanistan. And there should be establishment of democratic process which should give respect for the human rights and include the women's right as well. So the peace process should not leave any ungoverned spaces where the terrorists and their proxies can relocate. And we note that India has been suffering because of the issue of terrorism, and accordingly, India does not want any space in Afghanistan which is controlled by the terrorist organizations or their proxies. Now, after looking at India's stand on the Afghanistan peace process and various concerns of India regarding the US Taliban peace deal, let us look at why Afghanistan is important to India. So, the first reason is that it is important for regional balance of power. Now we note that Afghanistan is tied to India's vision of being a regional leader and a great power. And further, India is engaged in a competition with China over resources, and also the Afghanistan is important for India to counter the Pakistani influence. So accordingly, India's involvement in Afghanistan and its ability to mentor the nascent democracy in Afghanistan will go a long way to demonstrate to the world that India is indeed a major power and also a responsible power. Further, India's interest in Afghanistan relates to its needs to reduce the Pakistani influence in the state of Afghanistan. Further, Afghanistan is important for India's energy security, And we note that the pipeline project, that is TAPI, seeks to connect the important energy rich Central Asia to South Asia. And this project would only be possible if there is stability in Afghanistan. So that is why the stability and peaceful Afghanistan is important for India's energy security as well. Further, Afghanistan is a strategically located country and it is important for India's access to the landlocked Central Asian countries that border Afghanistan. And we note that India has been involved in the development of the Chabahar port through which it aims to connect to the Central Asian regions, and in this Afghanistan is an important player. Further, Afghanistan is home to very important natural resources, and according to the US Geological Survey, it has resource deposits worth $1 trillion, and that is why they can be very important for India. And finally, we note that Afghanistan's peace is important for the regional security in the South Asia. And if there is instability in Afghanistan and increase in violence due to terrorism, it is going to adversely impact India also because India has been witnessing terrorism in the past decades and which has mainly been perpetrated by terrorists which have got support from Pakistan and ISI. So in this discussion, we have seen the key aspects of the US-Taliban peace deal. Again, we have looked at an important aspect of this deal which talks about intra-Afghanistan talks and why is this ceasefire announcement by Taliban important. And after that, we have looked at India's concerns regarding this US-Taliban peace deal and what is India's stand on the Afghanistan's peace process. Further, what are the interests of India in Afghanistan? With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 1 is related to the issue of Maratha quota in Maharashtra. In this line, the quota that was provided by the Maharashtra government to the Maratha community was challenged first in the Bombay High Court. And in that verdict, Bombay High Court had rejected the Maratha quota because it exceeded the 50% cap that was provided by the Supreme Court in the Indira Sahni case. Now, this verdict of the Bombay High Court was challenged again in the Supreme Court. So now the Supreme Court is considering this issue of Maratha quota. And while examining the constitutional validity of this reservation that has been provided to the Maratha community in Maharashtra, the Supreme Court has said that it will look into the question whether the landmark 1992 Indira Sahni judgment needs to be revisited at this point of time. So basically, this article talks about the Supreme Court's intention of reviewing its own Indira Sahni judgment that it had provided back in 1992 related to the reservation. So in this article, we will try and understand some of the important issues or debate regarding the Maratha quota reservation in Maharashtra. Also, what are the key challenges in this case in the Supreme Court and the background of the Indira Sahni case. And what are the issues that Supreme Court is going to consider in this particular constitutional case. And the points that we discuss here are important for us from General Studies paper 2 point of view in the topic Constitution and Polity. Now, this issue will become important for us from the exam point of view once the judgment is out related to the review of the Indira Sahni judgment. However, before that, let us just try and understand what exactly is happening here so that as and when the judgment comes, you will have a better idea as to what to expect from that judgment or what to understand and what was the background. Now, the issue here is that the Maharashtra government had recently provided 12 to 13% Maratha quota, and it will take the total reservation in the state of Maharashtra by 64 to 65%. Now, already in the 2001, the government of Maharashtra passed the State Reservation Act, and that took the total reservation in Maharashtra to about 52%. Now, the issue here is that in the 1992 Indira Sahni judgment, the Supreme Court had ruled that the total reservation for the backward classes cannot go beyond the 50% mark in a particular state. And Maharashtra is already one of the few exceptions. However, with the reservation that has been provided to the Maratha community, the reservation has now gone to 64 to 65% in the state of Maharashtra, which is way beyond the 50% mark that was decided by the Supreme Court in the Indira Sahni judgment. And accordingly, the Bombay High Court had struck down this reservation that was provided to the Maratha community. Now, the issue here is that this judgment of the Bombay High Court was again challenged in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court had also stayed the reservation in the government jobs and college admissions for the Maratha community. And it has now referred this case to a 11-judge constitution bench to consider whether the states can exceed the 50% limit on the quotas that was set by itself in the Indira Sahni versus Union of India case. Now, the two important constitutional questions before the Supreme Court are that first is whether the states can declare a particular caste to be a socially and educationally backward class. So basically, it talks about the power of the states in declaring any particular caste as being socially and educationally backward class. And the second issue before the Supreme Court is that whether the states can breach the 50% ceiling for the vertical quotas that was set up by the Supreme Court in the famous Indira Sahni judgment in 1992. So now, what is the background of this Indira Sahni judgment and what are its key observations? So back in 1979, the Government of India had set up the Second Backward Classes Commission, which was known as the Mandal Commission. And it was set up to determine the criteria for defining the socially and educationally backward classes. Now, this Mandal Commission report identified 50% of the population at the same time as the socially and economically backward classes and had recommended 27% of quota for these socially and economically backward classes in addition to the existing 22.5% reservation that was there for the SCs or the STs. So after the report of the Mandal Commission was out in 1990, the VP Singh government set out to implement the provisions of the Mandal Commission report. So the reservation that was provided by the VP Singh government based on the Mandal Commission report was challenged in the Supreme Court in 1990s. And in the famous Indira Sahni judgment, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of the 27% reservation that was provided to the socially and the economically backward classes. However, Supreme Court had provided certain conditions for providing the reservation to the socially and the educationally backward classes. First was that there needs to be identified an advanced section among the OBCs which would be known as the creamy layer. And this particular section amongst the OBCs should be excluded from the list of beneficiaries of the reservation. And second condition that the Supreme Court had set up in this Indira Sahni judgment was that the total reserved quota should not exceed 50% except in some extraordinary situations. So these were the key highlights of the Indira Sahni judgment, which was related to the Mandal Commission implementation by the Government of India back in 1990s. And due to the Maratha reservation that has been provided by the Maharashtra government, the case has again come up in front of Supreme Court regarding the crossing of this 50% mark by the state governments. And accordingly, the Supreme Court is reviewing its own judgment that was provided for in the Indira Sahni judgment. So now, what are the issues that Supreme Court is going to look into while reviewing the Indira Sahni judgment of 1992? First is that whether the Indira Sahni judgment of 1992, which fixed the reservation at 50%, requires a relook by a larger bench. And the Supreme Court wants to review this 50% limit that was set up by itself in the light of subsequent constitutional amendments that have taken place and also the changes that have been witnessed in the society. The second question that the Supreme Court will consider is that whether the Maratha quota law is covered by the exemption of exceptional circumstances by which reservation can cross the 50% mark. Third issue is that whether the 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act deprives a state legislature of its power to enact a legislation to identify the socially and economically backward classes within the state to confer quota benefits to them. Now, you might be knowing that this 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act was related to the constitution of National Commission for Backward Classes under the Article 338B. And as the constitutional status has been provided to the National Commission for Backward Classes, the question that has come up in front of Supreme Court is that are the states deprived or the state legislature deprived of the powers to enact a legislation to identify socially and economically backward classes in that particular state. And the last question that the Supreme Court will look into is that whether the Article 342A abrogates a state's power to legislate for or classify any backward class of citizens and how it affects the federal structure or the federal policy. So these are the questions that the Supreme Court will be looking into while reviewing its own judgment that it had provided in the Indira Sahni case. So clearly it's a news in transition and let us wait for the final judgment to come out, and that is when it will become very important for us from the mains examination perspective. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 is related to the issue of electoral bonds. And as the Election Commission of India has announced the dates for the elections to the state legislative assemblies of the 5 states, this issue of electoral bonds has again come up. And you all know that the electoral bond scheme was announced in the Union Budget of 2017 and 18 in an attempt to cleanse the system of political funding in the country. However, there are certain provisions in this scheme which raise an objection on the transparency of political funding by the means of electoral bonds. Now, because of the lack of transparency in political funding by the means of electoral bonds, a case was filed in the Supreme Court back in 2017. And based on that case, the Supreme Court of India had passed an interim order which had asked all the political parties to disclose the details of the donations received by them through anonymous electoral bonds in a sealed cover to the Election Commission of India. So in this article, we will revise from a previous DNS video where we have discussed this interim judgment of the Supreme Court of India related to the electoral bonds, what was the submission of the Election Commission of India, what is the stand of the Government of India on the issue of electoral bonds, and what are some of the issues related to the electoral bonds in India. And they can be very important for us from the General Studies Paper 2 point of view in the topic polity. Now, we already know that the electoral bonds were challenged in the Supreme Court by an NGO by the name Association for Democratic Rights. And they had opposed the electoral bond scheme because of lack of transparency. And also, the political parties were not required to give out the names of the companies which were donating to them. So in this regard, the Supreme Court has given an interim order. And in this line, it has directed all the political parties to provide complete information to the Election Commission in a sealed cover regarding every single donator or donor and the contribution it has received till date after the introduction of electoral bonds. Now, what does this sealed cover mean? So by sealed cover, it should mean that all this information by the political parties will be provided to the Election Commission of India. However, this information will not come out in the public domain. Now, regarding the lack of transparency, the Supreme Court has observed that this lack of transparency has tremendous bearing on the sanctity of the electoral process in the country, which means that the lack of transparency was likely to adversely impact the electoral process in India because the political parties could be influenced by the corporates. And in this order, the Supreme Court has said that all the political parties will now provide the Election Commission with, firstly, the detailed particulars of the donors as against each bond, which means that the political parties will have to submit the particulars of all the donors to the Election Commission of India. Secondly, they will also have to disclose the amount of each such bond and also full particulars and the credit received against each bond, which means that they will have to disclose the amount that they have received through these electoral bonds and also the names of the companies and people who have invested in these electoral bonds. Further, the political parties will also have to provide the particulars of the bank account to which the amount was credited and also the date on which such amount was credited to the bank account of the political parties. So these are the aspects of the interim order of the Supreme Court on electoral bonds. Now, in this case in Supreme Court, the government has justified the scheme as an experiment to eradicate the black money. Further, it has submitted in the Supreme Court that the government should be given a free hand to execute its policy and the court should not pass any order for the present. However, the Election Commission had raised various reservations regarding the electoral bond scheme in the way in which it has been implemented. And the reservations of the Election Commission were particularly about the transparency in political funding. Further, the Election Commission had submitted that the electoral bonds legalize the anonymity of political donors and the parties receiving the contributions. So now first let's understand what is an electoral bond and how was this scheme introduced. So regarding this, you should note that the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance had promulgated the electoral bond scheme in 2018. And it was notified under the Section 31(3) of the Reserve Bank of India Act. So these can be a few important aspects for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Second, let's look at what is an electoral bond. So regarding this, you should note that it is a bond issued in the nature of promissory note, which shall be bearer banking instrument, which means that anybody who holds this promissory note or the electoral bond can get it encashed. And this bond shall not carry the name of the buyer or the payee, which means that the person or company which is giving the political funding, its name will not be disclosed. And this causes lack of transparency, and which is the main issue in the case which is going on in the Supreme Court. Further, you should note that these electoral bonds do not provide any interest. Normally, we note that in other kind of bonds, interest is provided by the person or the company which is trying to raise the fund through the bonds. However, in this case, no interest will be provided. However, these electoral bonds will be tax deductible, which means that tax exemptions will be provided to the people who are funding the political parties through the electoral bonds. Now, after this, let's revise the issues with the electoral bonds that we have discussed in the DNS of 28th March. Now, for the introduction of electoral bonds in India, changes were made in the following acts. And these changes were done in the Finance Act, which is presented with the budget in the year 2016, as well as in the Finance Act of 2017. In the Finance Act of 2016, the changes were made in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010. And further, changes were also made in the Income Tax Act of 1961, the Representation of People Act 1951, the Companies Act of 2013, and the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. So you should keep this aspect in mind that the changes were made in the following acts for the introduction of electoral bonds. And this can be a potential question for your preliminary examination. Now let us look at the impact of introduction of electoral bonds and what are the associated issues with these electoral bonds in India. Now, before the introduction of electoral bonds, donations to the political parties could be done in cash below the amount of rupees 20,000. However, after the introduction of electoral bonds, this amount was reduced only to 2,000. And now all the donations above rupees 2,000 cannot be done in cash, and they have to be done through the electoral bonds. Now, previously, the political parties had to declare donations in excess of rupees 2,000 received from any person or company. So these political parties had to declare the donations which were in excess of rupees 20,000 before the introduction of electoral bonds. Also, the political parties were supposed to maintain the records of contributions which were made in excess of rupees 20,000 with the names and addresses of all the donors. However, after the introduction of electoral bonds through the Finance Act of 2017, the donor is not required to disclose the name of the political party while purchasing the electoral bonds. And the political parties are not required to maintain the records of these donors. Now, this is one of the issues with the introduction of electoral bonds because previously all the donations above rupees 20,000 had to be maintained by the political parties as to where it is coming from and the name and address of the donating company or the corporate. However, now this provision has been done away with, and this affects the cause of transparency in the funding of elections. This is because the names of the company which are donating to particular political parties is not being given out. Now, previously under the Companies Act of 2013, a company had to be at least 3 years old in order to contribute to a political party, and its contribution could not have been more than 7.5% of its average net profit in the 3 preceding years. So this was the provision in the Companies Act before the electoral bonds were introduced. However, with the introduction of electoral bonds and the amendment in the Companies Act 2013, the government has removed the cap of 7.5% on political donations by the company. Secondly, now the companies need not disclose the name of political party to which the company has contributed. So now what is the issue with these amendments and the introduction of electoral bonds and the changes in the Companies Act? Now any company can donate any amount of cash through the electoral bonds and the identity of such company shall not be disclosed. So that is why shell companies can be formed by these companies just for political funding, and this can be a major source of corruption. So the first issue was related to the anonymity and transparency, while the second is related to the shell companies and the source of corruption in political funding. So these are two major issues. The third major issue is related to the foreign contribution or foreign funding of the political parties. Now regarding foreign funding, you should note that previously under the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, the foreign funding or all the funding from the foreign sources was not allowed to the political parties. However, now with the introduction of electoral bonds and the changes in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, it has been allowed that the donations can be received from foreign companies which have a majority stake in Indian companies. And this could only be done if the foreign companies were following the FEMA guidelines and which are related to the foreign investment in the sectors in which they operate. So, by the changes in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, now the foreign funding for the political parties is also open. And this can also lead to a corruption and influencing of the policy decisions in India. So, the three major issues are related to transparency, corruption, and the foreign funding. Now, let us look at the submission of the Election Commission of India in the Supreme Court regarding the electoral bonds. Now, as we have learned about the various issues related or associated with the electoral bonds, the Election Commission of India has submitted in the Supreme Court that the introduction of electoral bonds and the way in which they have been introduced causes a serious impact on the transparency in political funding. This is because the companies are not required to disclose their names and the names of the political parties to which they are funding. Secondly, by allowing the foreign funding through the purchase of electoral bonds, these kinds of funding invite foreign corporate powers into Indian politics. So this can also lead to interference in the Indian politics. This is because the foreign companies can now invest in the political parties. Further, the Election Commission of India also raised concerns on the two consecutive amendments which were made in the Finance Acts of 2016 and 17. And we have learned that these amendments were related to changes in the Income Tax Act, the Representation of People Act 1951, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010, etc. And regarding these amendments, the Election Commission has said that these amendments would pump in black money for political parties through the shell companies. And this will also allow unchecked foreign funding of political parties in India, which could lead to Indian politics being influenced by the foreign companies. The Election Commission has also said that it had warned the Ministry of Law and Justice about the amendments and the adverse impact these could have on the political funding in India. Now, this matter is sub judice, and the Supreme Court is yet to take a decision or give a verdict on this issue. Now, this petition has been filed in the Supreme Court by the Association for Democratic Rights, or ADR, and they have raised the issue of unlimited corporate funding and transparency in political funding. Now, this article on page number 9 talks about NSIL, which is the commercial arm of Indian Space Research Organization, or the ISRO. And the details of this NSIL has been discussed in the DNS of 18th December 2020. So do go through this, and this can be a very important aspect for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So do go through this video and try and revise the NSIL, which is the commercial arm of ISRO. And with this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.